The apartment was full of the specific noise of a family that had forgotten to be careful about happiness. Ara was on the living room floor attempting to feed her stuffed rabbit a piece of mango that the rabbit had no interest in accepting, narrating the situation in the private language she used when she felt strongly about something. Dae-sung was in the kitchen, laughing at something Adaze had just said. A real laugh, the kind that arrived without permission, the kind that used his whole face. Adaze was leaning against the kitchen counter in a silk blouse and bare feet, one hand wrapped around a mug, watching him laugh with the expression she only wore inside this apartment, inside this life, open, unguarded, entirely hers. "She's been trying to feed that rabbit for 20 minutes, Adaze said. "The rabbit has principles," Dae-sung said. "The rabbit is going to win." Ara looked up at both of them, assessed the room, determined that nobody was paying sufficient attention to the crisis at hand, and announced her dissatisfaction in 3 sharp syllables. "We hear you," Dae-sung called. Ara returned to the rabbit. This was the life. Tuesday evening, mango, a rabbit with principles, and the particular warmth of a home that had been built by people who understood the cost of the alternative. Adaze looked at Dae-sung across the kitchen and felt the thing she still wasn't entirely accustomed to feeling. Not the composed satisfaction of a woman who had made a good decision, but something warmer and less manageable than that. Something that arrived in the ordinary moments more than the significant ones. Something that had no boardroom equivalent. The doorbell rang, not a knock. The bell, sharp, single, immediate. Dae-sung looked toward the door. Adaze straightened slightly. Ara ignored it completely, too committed to the mango situation to be distracted by adult business. "Expecting someone?" Adaze said. No. He was already moving toward the door, wiping his hands on a cloth from the counter. Adaze crossed the kitchen doorway into the living room and bent to move the mango slice out of Ara's determined grip before it ended up somewhere permanent. She heard the front door open. She heard Dae-sung's voice. "Hello?" And then nothing, no responding voice, no exchange. She looked up. Beneath the front door, sliding across the hardwood floor in the specific way of something deliberately pushed through the gap, came an envelope. Cream, slim, no return address. Adaze was closer to it than Dae-sung was. She straightened, crossed the room, and picked it up before he had turned from the open doorway where he stood looking into an empty hallway. She turned the envelope over. 3 words, handwritten on the front in clean, deliberate script. "For Dae-sung only." She looked at the words. She looked at the hallway beyond the open door where Dae-sung stood still, looking left and right at nothing. Whoever had rung the bell was already gone. No footsteps, no elevator sound, just the empty quiet of a corridor that had held someone 30 seconds ago, and now held no one. He turned back. His eyes found the envelope in her hand. He went very still. Not guilty still. Not the stillness of a man who knows what this is and is managing the moment of being caught. Something different. Something she would spend the next 72 hours trying to precisely name. The stillness of a man who doesn't know what this is, but whose body has already registered that it is something. She held it out to him. It came under the door. He crossed the room and took it from her. He looked at the front. His jaw moved once. "Do you know what it is?" she said. No. She watched his face. His face was telling the truth. He did not know what it was, but he looked at it the way people looked at things they were afraid to open. Not because they knew what was inside, but because some part of them had already understood that the inside was going to be a before and after line. That whatever was in this envelope was going to divide the timeline of their life into the part that came before it arrived and everything that came after. "Open it," she said. He looked at her once. Then he opened it. If this story already has your stomach turning and we are barely 3 minutes in, that is exactly where you are supposed to be. Subscribe right now and drop a comment. Do you think Adaze should have picked that envelope up or left it on the floor where it landed? Tell me, because that one decision is going to matter more than anyone in this apartment currently understands. He read it standing in the middle of his own living room with Ara on the floor between them, still negotiating with the rabbit, and Adaze watching his face with the full precision of a woman who reads human expression for a living. She watched him read it once. She watched him read it twice. She watched the thing move through his face that she had only seen once before, on the night she sat across from him in low light and told him that his ex-wife had left him for her fiancé. That specific, controlled catastrophe, that particular quality of stillness that was not calm, but was the thing a person built around themselves when calm was no longer available. Dae-sung, he folded the letter back into the envelope. He looked up. "What is it?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said the thing that would hollow out the next 72 hours of her life. "It's nothing urgent," he said. "Medical correspondence. I'll deal with it." He was lying. She knew he was lying with the same certainty she knew everything she had ever verified before acting on. Not because his face gave too much away, but because it gave nothing away. And Park Dae-sung was a man who only locked his face completely when the thing behind it was too large to risk partial visibility. She said nothing. She let him carry it to the bedroom, and she returned to the kitchen, and she finished her tea, and she watched Ara finally accept defeat on the rabbit situation and move on to disassembling a board book instead. And she was quiet for the rest of the evening in the way of a woman who is waiting, who is very good at waiting, and who understands that pushing a locked door before you are ready to handle what is behind it is never the right strategy. He didn't sleep. She felt it beside her in the dark. Not movement, not sound, just the specific quality of wakefulness that a body emits when the mind will not release it. She lay still. She did not reach for him. She gave him the dark and the privacy of it, and she stared at the ceiling and she thought about the 3 words on the front of that envelope. For Dae-sung only, whoever pushed that envelope under her door had known she would be here, had known that the default recipient of anything that arrived at this apartment was now both of them, had written those 3 words specifically to create a separation that this household no longer naturally contained. Someone had sent that envelope to divide them. The question was from which direction the division was intended. By morning, he was dressed before she was, which he was never. He had made tea, but his was barely touched, which it never was. He kissed her at the kitchen counter with the specific warmth of a man, trying very hard to be present. In a moment he was only partially inside, and she kissed him back and said nothing, and watched him move through the morning with the careful deliberateness of a person maintaining a performance under enormous internal pressure. He left for the office at his normal time. She gave him 40 minutes. Then she called Sandra. "I need to know if a medical envelope can be traced," she said. "Handwritten address, no return, slid under a residential door." "Depends entirely on the content and whether there is a clinic or registry attached," Sandra said. "If it's connected to any medical institution, there will be a paper trail. Give me what you have." "I don't have the letter," Adais said. "I only saw the outside." "Then I need a direction to search in." Adais was quiet for a moment. "Search anything connected to Park Dae-sung's medical history that involves fertility," she said. "Anything involving a clinic or a procedure, or an arrangement made in the last 4 years. Sandra paused. "That's a sensitive area." "I know what area it is," Adaisi said. "I need to understand what I'm walking into before I walk into it." 24 hours, Sandra said. She went to work. She ran 3 meetings and a strategy review, and a one-on-one with her legal team about a pending contract, and she did all of it with the surface performance of a woman whose life is fully intact and whose attention is completely here. Underneath the performance, she was doing the other thing, the thing she always did when a situation was developing, faster than her information could match. She was staying very still and very watchful and collecting every available data point while revealing nothing. Dae-sung was quiet at the office. Competent, present, professional, but the specific warmth that had become his baseline in the last 18 months, the ease that lived in him now the way tension used to, was absent. He was performing normal. She recognized the performance because she was running one simultaneously, and she knew every note of it from the inside. They drove home together. Ara launched at both of them from the childcare provider's arms with the total physical commitment she brought to every reunion, as though each time they returned was a minor miracle she intended to fully celebrate. Dae-sung held her, and the expression on his face when he held her was the only moment all day that his performance cracked completely open. Just love, just the total undefended reality of a man holding his daughter, his glasses slightly pushed by her small, grabbing hand, his long, dark hair immediately claimed by her fingers. Adais watched him hold Ara and felt the fear she had been managing all day arrive fully in her chest for the first time. Not fear of him. Fear for what was in that envelope. Fear of the specific shape of a thing that had been sent anonymously, addressed exclusively to him, and was currently folded inside the bedside drawer where she had heard him put it last night. She was afraid of what she didn't know. That was new. Daisy Williams was not familiar with the specific texture of fearing information. She had always moved toward truth, not away from it. She had built her entire life on the principle that a verified fact, however difficult, was always preferable to a comfortable uncertainty. Tonight, for the first time, she understood why some people chose the uncertainty. He came to bed and lay beside her, and she could feel him not sleeping again. And she lay in the dark, and she made a decision. She would give him one more day. One day, to come to her. Because he was a man who had always come to her when he was ready. Not a man who hid things indefinitely. Not a man who managed her, or withheld from her as a strategy. But a man who processed privately, and then brought her the full truth once he had found the edges of it. She knew who he was. She was going to trust who he was for 24 more hours. The 24 hours passed. He didn't come to her. She was already building the case before Sandra called back. Sandra called on the morning of the third day. Park Dae-sung was diagnosed with severe oligospermia 4 years ago, Sandra said. A specialist clinic in the city. I have the name. The diagnosis was effectively a fertility barrier. He and his then-wife pursued a donor conception arrangement through a private clinic. The arrangement was managed almost entirely by the wife. Min Soo-yeon held medical power of attorney for the process and selected the donor profile independently. Adais was sitting at her desk with the door to her glass office closed. Her hand was flat on the desk's surface. Her face was completely neutral. The donor, she said. The donor profile that Min Soo-yeon selected and approved is registered under a private alias in the clinic system, Sandra said. The alias connects to a real identity through a secondary registration the clinic required for legal disclosure purposes. Sandra, the registered donor identity is Dominic Ashford. The office was completely silent. Adais sat at her desk and was still for a very long time. Does Dae-sung know? She said. Not from the clinic's records, Sandra said. The letter that was sent to your address 3 days ago was a routine genetic registry update. The clinic is legally required to notify all parties connected to a donor conception when the registry updates. This particular update was triggered because the donor, Dominic Ashford, recently registered a legal document that created a flag in the system, a paternity-adjacent legal filing. He filed something, Adaizi said. He found out he was a registered donor, Sandra said. Someone told him, or he found the record himself. Either way, he made a legal move 3 weeks ago that caused the clinic system to trigger notification letters to all connected parties. Meaning Dae-sung received that notification because someone, possibly Dominic, created the condition that caused it to be sent. That is the most accurate reading of the sequence, Sandra said. Adais ended the call. She sat at her desk in her glass office with her city below her and her hand flat on the surface, and she allowed herself exactly 90 seconds of being a woman who has just had something enormous land on her without warning. She felt it move through her. The specific devastation of a truth that reframes everything you thought you understood. Ara. Her daughter. The child who had grabbed her finger in a doorway and refused to let go. The child she had sat in a courtroom to protect. The child she had signed adoption papers for on a Thursday morning with clean light and a lawyer who shook her hand and meant it. Ara was Dominic Ashford's biological daughter. Adais had adopted Dominic Ashford's biological daughter. The man who had used her as an asset, who had engineered their engagement as a corporate positioning move, who had sat across from her at dinner tables and made comments shaped as jokes while holding the exact information that connected him to the destruction of her now husband's marriage. That man's DNA was in her daughter's blood. 90 seconds. Then she stood up. She straightened her blazer. She opened her office door and walked back into the day. She had work to do. She called him at noon. Not Dae-sung, Dominic. She had not spoken to him since the morning she had told him to leave her apartment. His number was still in her phone because removing it had felt, at the time, like a gesture, and she had no interest in gestures. She pressed call and listened to it ring, and when he answered, his voice had exactly the quality she expected. Not surprise, not discomfort, just the smooth, practiced management of a man who had been waiting for this call and had prepared for it. "A daze," he said. "You filed a legal document 3 weeks ago," she said. "I want to understand why." A pause, measured. "I don't know what you're referring to." Dominic. Another pause, this one different. The pause of a man recalibrating. "How did you find out?" he said. "How I find things out has never been your concern. And it isn't now," she said. "I want to understand the specific decision you made. You found out about Ara and the donor registration. And after the custody case had already failed, after Soo-yeon had already walked out of that courtroom with nothing and had no remaining position, you contacted her. You gave her the donor information. You handed her a new weapon and pointed her back at my family a second time." He was quiet. "Was that deliberate?" she said. "I found out recently," he said. His voice had shifted. The smooth management was still there, but underneath it something else, something she had never heard from him before, something that sounded, improbably, like genuine unease. "Soo-yeon contacted me first. After the custody case. She found me. She told me about the arrangement. She told me about the child. And you gave her the donor registration information to use as new leverage," Edaezi said. "I told her what I knew," he said. "You armed a woman with information you knew she would weaponize against my family," Adaez said. "After the first attempt had already failed, after the court had already seen exactly what Soo-yeon was and had ruled accordingly, you reached back into a closed situation and reopened it." Her voice was completely even, no anger in the surface of it, just precision. "And when that also produced nothing, when the soft message didn't land and you realized Soo-yeon alone wasn't going to be enough, you filed your own document to trigger the notification letter directly. Because you couldn't let it go. Because a man like you does not lose without finding a new angle. The child is biologically mine," he said. "I have legal standing." "You have a donor registration," she said. "You signed away parental rights as part of the donor agreement. You have no standing that my legal team cannot dismantle inside of one hearing." Her voice was completely even. "What you have done is confirmed to me that you are exactly who I decided you were the morning I told you to leave. You have not grown. You have not redirected. You have simply been patient." "Adize, do not contact my husband," she said. "Do not contact anyone connected to my family. If you file anything further, I will respond to it in the same way I respond to every threat that comes, at what is mine, completely without hesitation, and in a way you will not recover from professionally." She ended the call. She sat back in her chair and closed her eyes for 4 seconds. Then she opened them, picked up her phone, and called Dae-sung. "Come home early," she said when he answered. "I need to talk to you." His silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you know." The drive home was the longest 40 minutes she had sat through, since the night she had driven to his apartment with a letter she never delivered. She sat in the back of the car and looked out at the city and thought about Ara, specifically, only Ara. Not the biology, not the legal architecture, not the sequence of decisions and betrayals that had led to a mixed-race baby being born to 2 Korean parents in an arrangement managed by a woman who had already chosen her exit. Not any of that. Just Ara herself. The warm weight of her. The way she put her palm flat against Adaizi's cheek when she wanted to be seen. The way she had said mama with the authority of someone who does not make uncertain decisions and had never once retracted it. Nothing about what Sandra had told her this morning changed a single one of those things. Nothing about Dominic Ashford's DNA in her daughter's blood changed who Ara was or who she belonged to. She knew that. She needed Dae-sung to know that she knew it before she walked through the door. You need to pause right now and tell me something honest in these comments. Because some of you are furious at Daesung for sitting on that letter for 3 days without telling his wife. And some of you completely understand a man needing 72 hours to find the edges of something that just shattered his entire understanding of his own daughter's origin. Both of those people are right. Drop your take right now. Subscribe before this page closes on you, because this conversation between Adais and Daesung is the scene this entire story has been building toward, and it is about to happen. He was already home when she arrived. Ara was with the childcare provider until 6. He was sitting at the kitchen table, not working, not on his phone, just sitting with his hands flat on the surface and his glasses off, which he almost never did, which meant the glasses had come off at some point during the last few hours, and he had not had the presence of mind to put them back. She set her bag down. She sat across from him. He looked at her with the most undefended expression she had ever seen on his face. Past the night she had told him about Suyeon and Dominic, past the courthouse corridor, past their wedding morning. This was something underneath all of those. Something that had been underneath everything since the envelope had come under the door 3 days ago, and that he had been carrying alone in the specific way he still sometimes defaulted to when something felt too large to pass to another person, without first establishing that it wouldn't break them. "How long have you known?" he said. "Sandra called this morning," she said. "I called Dominic after." His jaw moved. "You called him." "I needed to understand the full sequence," she said. He confirmed it. He found out from Suyeon after the custody case failed. She came to him. He gave her the donor information and pointed her back at us. When that produced nothing, he filed his own document and created the notification himself. She looked at him steadily. "He has been engineering this in stages. That is the legal situation. I want to talk about the other thing." He met her eyes. "Tell me about the diagnosis," she said. "Tell me what happened, not because I need it to understand anything differently, because I want to hear it from you and I want to hear all of it." He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands on the table surface. He was, she understood, about to say something he had never said out loud to anyone. Not fully, not completely, not with all its weight. The specific shame of a thing a certain kind of man carries in a certain kind of silence for years. "I found out 3 years into the marriage," he said. "A routine check. The specialist was very calm about it. He said it was manageable, that treatment could improve things, that there were options. He was very clinical." He paused. "I was not. I was..." He stopped. She waited. "I was devastated," he said. "Not because I couldn't have children, because I had not told her before we married, because I had not known before we married, but it felt, in the room with that specialist, like a thing I should have known, like a failure I had been carrying without knowing it was there." He looked up. "I told her that night. She was quiet. She held my hand. She said she wasn't leaving, and she wasn't afraid, and she wanted to be a mother, and we would find a way." "You believed her?" "I believed her completely," he said. "She seemed resolved, calm. She said she would manage the clinic process, that it was better for her to handle the coordination, because I was already carrying the emotional weight of the diagnosis, and she didn't want to add the administrative burden. I was grateful. I trusted her with it entirely." He paused again. His hands were very still on the table. "She told me the donor was anonymous," he said. "A screen profile through the clinic. She handled the selection. I never saw the file. She said it was cleaner that way, that if I didn't know the profile, I wouldn't spend time looking for those features in our child. She said she would choose someone good." His voice had gone to that specific flat register she knew, the one where something has been said so many times internally that the external delivery has been stripped of everything except the words themselves. "I trusted her with it." Adais looked at him across the table. This man she had chosen and who had chosen her. This man who had been handed a diagnosis and a broken marriage and 8 months of single parenthood and had still arrived in her life with enough wholeness left to love someone new. And she felt the rage on his behalf so cleanly and so completely that she had to sit with it for a moment before she could speak. "She didn't choose someone good," she said. "No." She chose the man she was already moving toward, Adaze said. She used your diagnosis and your trust and your willingness to let her carry the process to make a decision that had nothing to do with building your family and everything to do with building a bridge to the exit she was already planning. He said nothing. Daesung, she said, his name in her mouth the way it lived there now, with weight, with permanence, with the specific intimacy of a word that had stopped being a name and started being something else. Look at me. He looked at her. Nothing that I'm about to say next has changed, she said. Not one thing. I need you to hear me say it before anything else happens, before the legal process and the confrontation, and whatever Dominic does next when he realizes his document produced nothing but a phone call from me. Before all of it, I need you to hear this first. He was completely still. Ara is my daughter, she said. I have the papers. I have the court record. I was in that room, and I signed my name, and she is mine in every way that the law recognizes, and in every way that matters beyond what the law recognizes. Her biology does not change her. Her biology does not change me. And it does not change you. She held his gaze with the full weight of the eye contact that had always been her most complete form of communication, the kind that left no room for misreading. You raised her. You are the reason she is who she is. You are the reason she reaches for people with both hands. You gave her that, nobody else. Not a donor profile and not a registration number and not Dominic Ashford. He was looking at her and she could see the thing working behind his eyes. The old shame of the diagnosis and the betrayal of the process and the 3 days of sitting with this alone. And she watched it move and she didn't look away from any of it. She called me Mama, Adaze said quietly. She decided that herself. She was 2 years old, and she looked at me across a breakfast table, and she said it like it was the most obvious fact in the world. You know what she did that same morning? He shook his head slightly. She called you Appa, and then she looked at both of us like we were the slowest people she had ever encountered for not having sorted this out sooner. Her voice was steady. She already knew. She has always already known. The paperwork caught up. The biology is irrelevant. He put his face in his hands. She reached across the table and put her hand on his arm, and she kept it there, and she let him have everything he had been carrying alone for 3 days. The fracturing of the story he had told himself about his daughter's origin, the reopening of the specific wound of a wife who had managed his most vulnerable truth as a tool for her own ends, the fear that this information would change something in the woman sitting across from him. She kept her hand on his arm, and she did not move, and she did not say anything else because she had said what needed to be said, and the rest of it was his to move through. When he finally looked up, his eyes behind the absent glasses were red-rimmed and completely clear. I should have told you the moment I read the letter, he said. Yes, she said. You should have. I was afraid, he said. Not of you, of what it would ask you to carry. That is not your call to make, she said. We decided who we were to each other. That decision includes the weight. That is not a courtesy you get to withhold from me. I know. Don't do it again. I won't. She stood up. She went to the counter and poured 2 glasses of water and brought them back and sat back down. They sat in the kitchen in the early evening light, and she looked at him, and he looked at her, and outside the city moved in its ordinary, unknowing way, and between them on the table were 2 glasses of water and the full truth, and none of it was comfortable, and none of it was over. Now, she said, tell me everything you know about the diagnosis and the clinic and the timeline, because I am building a case and I need the complete picture. He told her everything. They were still at the table when the child care provider arrived with Ara at 6. Ara came through the door at her standard velocity, which was somewhere between urgent and immediately, and found both her parents at the kitchen table and stopped. She looked at Daesung. She looked at Adaze. She looked at the 2 water glasses. Then she walked to the table, put both hands flat on the surface, and looked at Daesung with an expression of immense patience. Appa, she said. Sad? He looked at her. This child. This face. This person who had arrived in the world through a sequence of decisions, none of which had had her in mind, and who had proceeded to be the most deliberate, purposeful, certain small human either of them had ever encountered. A little, he said. She considered this information seriously. Then she climbed onto his lap, put both arms around his neck, and stayed there. He held her. Adaze watched them and felt the thing she had said at the table settle fully into its permanent form. Biology was a fact. What you did with a child, the mornings, the sweet potato, the board books, the cologne-smelling presence of a father who had never once thought about leaving, was the only fact that mattered in any room that this child was also standing in. The next morning, Adaze called Soo-yeon, not through a lawyer, directly. The number was in a file from the custody case. Sandra had it. Adaze had kept it, because a woman who had once threatened her family was a woman whose contact information she maintained the way she maintained all information about active risks. Soo-yeon answered on the fourth ring. "Adaze," she said. Her voice was careful, composed in the deliberate way of a woman who had been expecting this call and had prepared for multiple versions of it. "I know everything," Adaze said, "about the donor arrangement, about the clinic, about what you did with Dae-sung's diagnosis and his trust, and the medical power of attorney he gave you." She paused. "I know that after the custody case failed, you contacted Dominic. I know you told him about Ara and the donor registration. I know the two of you attempted to use that information to create a new pressure point against my family." She paused again. "I want to know one thing, and I want you to tell me honestly." Soo-yeon was silent. "Did you ever intend to come back for Ara?" Adaze said, "before the magazine feature and the wedding announcement and the photographs? Before you knew what surrounded her? Was there ever a version of your return that was about her and not about what she was adjacent to?" The silence on the other end lasted a very long time. "No," Soo-yeon said finally. "Just that. No framing, no context, no language selected for emotional management. Just the word, delivered with the specific quality of a truth that has been kept private so long that saying it aloud produces something unexpected, something almost like relief." "Thank you," Adaze said. She ended the call. She sat with the answer for a moment. Not with anger. She had moved through the anger in Dae-sung's kitchen the night before, and it had done what anger did when it was processed honestly, rather than stored. She sat with the clean, sad, simple fact of a woman who had looked at her own child and made a calculation instead of a choice, and who had now confirmed that the calculation had been the whole of it. She thought about Ara on Dae-sung's lap the night before, both arms around his neck, staying. She thought about the stuffed rabbit, the mango, the board book systematically disassembled and then handed back piece by piece with an expression of enormous satisfaction. She thought about a doorbell and a cream envelope and the specific grace of a family that had been tested twice now and had held both times. She called her lawyer next. "I need Dominic Ashford's donor agreement reviewed and his rights under it confirmed," she said. "I want every clause that covers parental relinquishment, and I want to understand the legal exposure created by his recent filing." "How urgent?" "Treat it as urgent," she said. The legal review came back within 36 hours. The donor agreement was comprehensive. Dominic had signed a full relinquishment of parental rights as a standard condition of the private donor arrangement. Standard for the clinic, standard for the jurisdiction, legally binding. His recent filing had been a preliminary inquiry rather than a formal claim. The move of a man testing the water, establishing a paper trail, seeing what would surface. It had surfaced Adaze. Her lawyer was very direct. "His filing doesn't have legs," she said. "The relinquishment agreement is clean. He would need to argue fraud or duress to contest it, and there is no evidence of either. What he has done is create a record that we can now use to characterize his behavior as harassment if he continues." "Prepare that characterization," Adaze said. "I want it ready." She told Dae-sung that evening. She sat across from him at the same kitchen table that had held their most difficult conversation, and she laid out the legal picture clearly and completely and watched the tension that had been living in his shoulders for 5 days begin, slowly, visibly, to ease. He can't take her, Dae-sung said. He cannot take her, Adais said. And if he tries to create noise rather than pursue a claim, I have the documentation to shut that down before it reaches a public stage. He looked at her for a long moment. You moved this fast. I always move this fast when something threatens what is mine, she said. You know this. He almost smiled, the almost smile that preceded the real one by half a second on his beautiful face. I do know this, he said. Now, I need to ask you something, and I want the raw, honest answer in these comments. Some of you think Soo-yeon saying no, admitting she never intended to come back for Ara before the money, is the most honest moment in this entire story. Some of you think a mother admitting that about her own child is unforgivable. Full stop. No nuance available. Both of those takes are going in the comments right now. Drop it. Subscribe before this ends, because we are in the final movement and I am taking this all the way home. Dominic sent a message 2 weeks later. Not a legal document, a personal message to her direct number. 3 lines. I know you've built a case. I know you'll win it. I'm not filing anything further. She read it once. She sent it to her lawyer for the record. She did not respond. She thought about whether she felt anything about his withdrawal. Satisfaction, relief, the particular closure of a threat that had finally understood the futility of its own position. She sat with it honestly. What she felt was nothing. Not the dramatic nothing of a woman performing indifference. Actual nothing. He had become exactly what he had always been in her life, a miscalculation she had corrected and moved on from. And the correction was now complete, and there was simply no emotional real estate remaining where he had once occupied space. That, she thought, was what it actually felt like to be finished with something. She put her phone down and went to find her family. They were in the living room. Dae-sung was on the floor with Ara, who had discovered that if she placed her board books in a specific configuration, she could construct something that functioned approximately as a wall, and she was deeply committed to this architectural project and required both his active assistance and running commentary on her progress. His glasses were pushed up into his hair because she had put them there 20 minutes ago, and he had forgotten to take them back. His long, dark hair was partially undone. He was sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor in a weekend shirt, helping a 2.5-year-old build a wall out of board books, and he was the most content, and the most himself, and the most entirely real that she had ever seen him. He looked up when she came in. She's building infrastructure, he said. I can see that. She has a vision. She always has a vision. Ara looked up from the wall, assessed Adais with the seriousness of a project manager encountering a new variable, and pointed at the floor beside Dae-sung with an authority that suggested participation was not optional. Adais sat down on the floor, in her work blouse and trousers and bare feet, cross-legged on the hardwood beside her husband, and Ara placed a board book in her hand and pointed at the wall with the clear implication that Adais now understood her assignment and should perform it accordingly. What exactly are we building? Adais said. She hasn't told me, Dae-sung said. You've been doing this for 20 minutes without knowing what it is? She seems to know what it is, he said. I've been following instructions. Ara placed another book in Adais's hand and looked at her. Right, Adaisi said. Okay. She placed the book where Ara pointed. Ara stepped back and looked at the wall with her hands on her hips in the specific evaluative posture she used when assessing whether something met her standards. She looked at the contribution Adais had made. She looked at the overall structure. She looked back at Adais. She nodded once. Approving. Dae-sung put his hand over his mouth. His shoulders were shaking. Don't, Adaisi said. I'm not saying anything, he said. Your entire face is saying something. Ara sat back down between them and returned to the wall, and the three of them sat on the hardwood floor in the evening light, building something whose purpose only one of them fully understood, and which was, by the only measure that mattered, exactly right. This was the thing nobody told you about the life that came after the hard part. The life that came after the letters, and the courtrooms, and the confrontations, and the phone calls, and the 72 hours of sitting with something alone before you were ready to pass it to the person who would carry it with you. Nobody told you that it was ordinary. Not in a diminished way. in the most complete and irreplaceable way. Tuesday evenings on a hardwood floor, a board book wall, a child with her hands on her hips applying professional standards to amateur construction. The world outside was what it was. It would always be what it was, producing its envelopes and its filings and its people who had not yet found a reason to stop reaching for things that were not theirs. That would not change. There would be other envelopes. There would be other moments where the doorbell rang in the middle of happiness and something cold slid under the threshold. But this room, this floor, this man pushing his glasses back into place after taking them out of his hair where their daughter had placed them. This child who had been born through a sequence of betrayals and had proceeded to be the most certain, the most directed, the most unambiguously purposeful small person either of them had ever encountered. This was the thing that held. This was the thing that had always been going to hold. Later, after Ara was in bed, installed there after considerable negotiation, the board book wall left standing by mutual agreement, because she had looked at both of them with an expression that made dismantling it feel genuinely unconscionable. Adais and Dai Sung sat on the gray sectional in the low lamplight, and she told him about Dominic's message. She told him about the withdrawal. She told him the legal picture was clean and the threat was done. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Is it over?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Suyeon as well?" "Suyeon has no remaining legal position and no remaining leverage," she said. "Sandra will keep monitoring. But yes." He nodded slowly. He looked toward the hallway where Ara was sleeping. The nightlight at the end of the hall made a warm, small glow at the edge of the dark. "She said no," he said quietly. He meant Suyeon's answer to Adaisi's question on the phone. She had told him about the call. She had told him about the answer. He had been quiet about it for 2 weeks, and she had let him carry it at his own pace. "She said no?" Adais confirmed. He was quiet again for a moment. "I think I knew," he said. "Not at the time. Not when she left. But later, when I had the distance to look at it clearly, I think I knew that what she felt for Ara was not what I feel for Ara. There was something in the way she managed the pregnancy, efficiently, competently, but something was missing in it." He paused. "I told myself I was wrong, that I was reading it wrong out of my own fear. I told myself she loved our daughter, and she left because of the marriage, not because of Ara." "You needed that to be true," Adais said, "for Ara's sake." "Yes. You were being a good father." He turned and looked at her. "I was avoiding the truth. Both things can be true simultaneously," she said. He held her gaze. Then he reached over and took her hand and held it the way he always held it, with the quiet certainty of a man who has made one decision and intends to keep making it every day without re-examination. She let him hold it. Outside the city ran its noise and its light and its complete indifference to the specific interior lives of the people it contained. In here the lamp was warm, and Ara was sleeping, and the board book wall was standing, and the truth between them was complete. "I have something to ask you," he said. She looked at him. "I want to tell Ara," he said. "Not now, not for years, but someday, when she is old enough to hold it and use it rather than be hurt by it. I want her to know her full story." He paused. "All of it. The diagnosis, the arrangement, who the donor was, what happened between her birth parents, and why she ended up in the life she has." He looked at Adais steadily. "I want her to grow up knowing everything, and still knowing that none of it changed anything that mattered." Adais was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "We will tell her together when she is ready." "You agree?" "She deserves the truth," Adais said. "She has always deserved it. We will give it to her in the way she can receive it, and we will be there when she does." She squeezed his hand once. "She is going to be extraordinary, Daesung. You know that, right? Everything that was done around her, and before her, and despite her, she is going to take the full knowledge of it, and she is going to be extraordinary." He looked at her for a long time. His eyes were very clear. She already is, he said. From down the hall came a small sound, not crying, not distress, just the soft, unconscious sound of a sleeping child shifting in her sleep. The nightlight held its warm, small glow. The board book wall stood. Adaz looked at the man beside her, who had come to her door with a termination letter and a baby on his hip and a life that had been taken apart, and quietly, stubbornly, continued. Who had loved his daughter through a truth he didn't know, and a truth he did. Who had stood in a corridor outside a courtroom with bright eyes and said thank you and been told that was not what this was. He was what this was. This man on this couch in this lamplight, holding her hand without making it a moment, being exactly and entirely and without performance himself. This was what this was. Some love does not arrive clean. Some love arrives through the evidence of other people's worst decisions, through a diagnosis and a betrayal, and a donor agreement, and a child who came into the world carrying a secret none of the adults around her had the courage to tell. Some love is built in the aftermath of things that should have broken the people building it. And some love, the kind that has been tested by envelopes pushed under doors, and courtroom corridors, and the 2 a.m. stillness of a man sitting with something alone, and the 2 a.m. stillness of a woman deciding to give him one more day, is the only kind that turns out, in the end, to be fully load-bearing. Ara knew this before any of them. She knew it in a doorway at 11 months old with both hands and an expression of complete satisfaction and zero doubt. She has always known exactly what she built. She built something that holds. If this story wrecked you, and I believe it did, then you know what to do. Subscribe to this channel right now because this is what every story here is made to do. Find the part of you that understands what it costs to stay and speak directly to it. Comment the moment that undid you. Was it the envelope? Soo-yeon saying no? Dae-sung on the floor with his glasses pushed into his hair. The board book wall? I want every single answer. And if you made it all the way to the end without leaving a like, Ara built this family with her bare hands at 11 months old. The least you can do is tap the button.